I've used a lot of meal services, but Hungry Root truly stands out because it's built around the way real families live and eat. They don't just send meal kits. They personalize your grocery cart and meal plan based on your preferences and dietary goals. All I had to do was take a short quiz, and right away, their smart cart technology started building a cart that fit how we eat. Now, each week feels easier, like someone else is doing the thinking for me. I've been focused on cleaner eating lately, and I love that Hungry Root keeps out over 200 additives, including things like high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners. Their meats are hormone and antibiotic free, and the produce options include organic and non GMO picks. They also stock brands I already trust, like Oatly, Vital Farms, and Harmless Harvest. One of our favorite meals has been the teriyaki salmon with green beans, light, flavorful, and done in 12 minutes flat. Plus, I've noticed we waste less food, spend less time shopping, and even save money by skipping those impulse grocery buys. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/Dr. Meg and use code Dr. Meg. That's hungryroot.com/Dr. Meg, code Dr. Meg, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/Dr. Meg, code Dr. Meg. Welcome to another episode of Parenting Great Kids. I'm your host, Dr. Meg Meeker, and today I have a truly remarkable guest joining me. She's a woman whose insights into parenting have spanned over 3 decades. She's a clinical social worker, psychoanalyst, and a beacon of guidance for parents. Her name is Erica Komisar. She authored 2 groundbreaking books, Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters, and Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. They are amazing books, 2 of the most important parenting books you'll ever read, so get a copy of each. But today, I want to talk to Erica about an extraordinary lecture that she gave recently at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. So grab a cup of coffee, find a comfortable spot, and get ready for a conversation that will reshape the way you think about parenting.
Parents need to be able to regulate their emotions. They need to be resilient to stress themselves. They need to be what we call sensitive, empathic nurturers who focus more on understanding than on discipline. That doesn't mean there's no structure, but they're not discipline focused. They're understanding focused, and when necessary, provide structure.
Welcome to Parenting Great Kids. Here's your host, Dr. Meg Meeker.
Erica, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Meg. Thanks for having me.
You know, after I heard your lecture and read your paper that you presented at ARC, I immediately sent out the YouTube video to as many people as I could, including my adult children who are parenting my grandkids. So they got to get it right. But you talk about some extraordinary things in just 20 minutes. You talk about raising resilient kids and the amount of mental illness that we're seeing surging amongst not only teenagers, but young kids in our country. But you talk about 5 irreducible needs that all children have, and parents need to hear these. So if it's okay, I'd like to walk through each of them. The first factor you say is that kids are neurologically fragile at birth. This flies in the face of what we hear. Oh, kids are resilient. Kids can handle this. And you're saying, no, there's a fragility there that you need to know about. What do you mean by neurological fragility?
Well, I mean, kids can be resilient, but they're not resilient when they're born. They're born incredibly vulnerable in terms of, they're very influenced by their environment. And they have these irreducible needs for attachment, security, to feel safe in the world, to feel secure. I mean, they've basically gone from being in the womb to being out in the world and feeling very unsafe. And so you could say that attachment security is the ultimate in parents helping over the first 3-year period to make that child feel safe in the world. And that safety becomes the foundation for their mental health going forward.
So if they don't form healthy attachments in those first few years of life, what you're saying is that's going to catch up with them middle school, junior high, and high school. And that could be one of the reasons that they may struggle with mental illness. Is that correct?
Yes, and it can show itself earlier than adolescence. I mean, it can show itself as early as, there are children as early as 2 and 3 years old who are being diagnosed with attachment disorders, but they're not calling them attachment disorders. They're calling them behavioral problems. They're calling them depression or anxiety or ADHD, but they're basically attachment disorders. So it shows itself before adolescence. But if it doesn't show itself before adolescence, say adolescence is another vulnerable point where it shows itself. So it's a point of breakdown.
So before we go on to the second factor, I really want to dig into this a little bit, this parent attachment, because it's critically important. What are things that parents can do to make sure they're developing strong attachments with their infants and their young toddlers?
So the first 3 years we call it the critical period of brain development, because by the end of 3 years, 85% of a child's right brain is developed. So that part of the brain is responsible for emotional regulation, resilience to stress, things that children need to be mentally healthy. Right? We say that children can't deal with adversity today, but the only way that we learn to deal with adversity is through attachment security in the beginning. So, and it's only after a 3-year period of parents being as physically and emotionally present as possible that children internalize that feeling of security and safety and the idea that when they have needs, their environment will meet those needs. It's after that 3-year period that children can begin to do things like regulate their emotions and come back to a period of homeostasis. So, every time a mother soothes a baby or a primary attachment figure soothes a baby that's in distress, they're regulating their emotions. We don't think of it that way. We just call it soothing. But it's that soothing from moment to moment that actually helps that baby to learn to regulate their emotions going forward. And what we're seeing is this breakdown in disorders of emotional regulation. That's what depression and anxiety and ADHD are. Disorders of emotions. People can't regulate their emotions. They can't keep their emotions from going too high or too low. So, we know that emotional regulation has a developmental line, and it starts in the first 3 years, and it starts with parents being physically and emotionally available to that child to teach them how to regulate their emotions.
That's really hard because not necessarily the physical presence, but emotional presence, because what I'm experiencing, and I'm sure you're seeing the same thing with many of our kids, is that a lot of parents are so stressed and anxious. It's very hard for them to be emotionally present for their kids because they're so wound up in their own angst. Are you seeing that as well?
Well, that's the second pillar, which is if parents aren't healthy, then their children can't be healthy. I use an expression, which is a terrible expression, but I'll say it anyway, which is that there's always survivors in a shipwreck, right? So it's possible to have come from a really unhealthy and dysfunctional background and survive, right? But in general, parents need to be able to regulate their emotions. They need to be resilient to stress themselves. They need to be what we call sensitive, empathic nurturers who focus more on understanding than on discipline. That doesn't mean there's no structure, but they're not discipline focused. They're understanding focused, and when necessary, provide structure. And those things help children to grow up to be healthy. But when we've had, as parents, our own past losses and traumas and conflicts that we haven't dealt with in our past, in our own childhood, conflicts with our own parents, and we just bury them, when we have children, those conflicts and those losses and those traumas come back to haunt us, and they haunt our children. And the only way to really keep that generational expression of mental illness is to break the cycle, right? Is to really be self-aware, to go into some therapy yourself, to really work through those and resolve those conflicts and those losses from your own childhood so you don't pass them on to your children.
So it's really like a preload. Parents come into parenting their own kids with their own issues and experiences with their parent and in childhood. So if a parent recognizes I have difficulty attaching with my child, or I'm hesitant to do so, or I feel inadequate to do so because perhaps I wasn't attached to my parents, say, kids who didn't have a mom growing up or didn't have a dad, can a parent with help, can they get past that so that they can learn to be emotionally present for their kids and to form attachments to their kids?
Well, as I said, there's these two critical periods of brain development, 0 to 3 and 9 to 25. And, obviously when our children leave our home, it becomes harder to help our children when they go to college, when they go out into the world to work, when they move out. But as long as they're under our roof, where there's life, there's hope. We say the brain is plastic. It grows, it shrinks. So we have the ability to change, and we always have the hope to change the dynamic with our children. And so as long as your children are still living under your roof, yes, there's hope that you can both help yourself and also through that process help your children.
Because I think it's important for parents listening to realize, parents often who are parenting kids who are 0 to 3, it's a very, very stressful time for them. They don't know how to parent. They've never been a parent before. And there may be some people listening who have a 10, 12, 15-year-old who say, well, wait a minute, I didn't know anything about that. Is it too late for me to attach to my child? Say I'm having difficulty with an 11-year-old or a 15-year-old. Is it too late for that parent to sort of reattach or attach to their child?
So it's never too late. It's never too late to try, and it's never too late to make inroads. It doesn't mean that it will be perfect. There are still things that maybe can't be repaired. But the truth is that, as I said, there is a lot of growth in the brain. There's a lot of growth in an adolescent's brain. And if you miss the first window, 0 to 3, and your child is an adolescent, and you try to repair that we use the word repair because I think of it like darning socks. No one darns socks anymore, but when we used to darn socks, we get a hole in the sock, we would darn the sock, and that hole where it was a hole is now stronger. So the idea that sometimes repair can make relationships even stronger. So it's never too late.
What are some of these symptoms or signs when a child doesn't have strong enough attachment, say from 0 to 3, and now you have a second grader, an eighth grader, a sixth grader? What are the signs that you look for as a clue that maybe attachment was an issue?
Well, there's 3 types of attachment disorders, and then there's correlation with mental illness. So I can tell you about that. So, when children develop, so you could think of an attachment disorder as a strategy. It's a strategy that a child uses unconsciously to deal with loss. And so if their mother or father isn't that available or is, physically present but not emotionally present, they develop a defense. They develop a strategy, which is no one's going to take care of me. I'm on my own. I got to take care of myself. And they turn away. They turn away from trusting their environment. They say, I can't trust the environment. I can only trust myself. Now, what does that do later on? It correlates to things like depression and the inability to form connections to people intimately, whether they're friends or intimate relationships, right? Because they're basically not capable of trusting. So that's called an avoidant attachment disorder. Then a different attachment disorder, so you say it's like the tail and the trunk of the same elephant. It's just different strategies that children use. Another strategy is called an ambivalent attachment disorder, where a child says, oh my God, my mother's going to leave again. I better cling on to her like a rhesus monkey with the wire rhesus monkeys. Let me cling on to my mother and hold on to her and never let her go because I know she's going to leave me. These babies become excessively clingy, won't let go, cry desperately when their mothers leave. And they develop, that's correlated later with anxiety, right? And the third is the saddest because it's a child who doesn't develop a strategy, who has no strategy, and cycles through all of the other strategies. And this leads to things like borderline personality disorder. So this would look like a child turning away from a mother first, then clinging desperately, then getting enraged at the mother and slapping her, and then turning away from her and then clinging to her. It's a baby who doesn't have one strategy. You could say it's healthier to have one strategy than to cycle through strategies and not have one solid strategy. And those children, then it usually leads to personality disorders like borderline personality disorder. So, and we're seeing a rise in borderline personality disorders in adolescents. We're seeing a lot of adolescents who are suicidal and who cut themselves and have self-harming behaviors. And we're seeing a rise in this. And again, we have to ask why. And it's because these are children who develop attachment disorders that have no strategy.
I love that, whenever you talk about parenting, you always turn it into the child's perspective. What does this child need? It isn't necessarily mom or dad, what do you want to give? It's here's what your child needs. And it's critically important to understand where your child is coming from, because then you can really help your kids. Because as you see and I see, issues with kids are not a child issue. It's really a family issue. And you talk about that in your talk. So we're talking about the 5 factors. You talk that kids are neurologically fragile at birth, that they need mentally healthy parents, and that they need a parent's presence, physical and emotional presence there. That is going to be tough for a lot of mothers listening, and it's going to make them feel guilty. Wait a minute, but you don't understand. I was a single mom and I had to work. So there's a lot of guilt there. And I think I would encourage mothers to read Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters, because you address that. We also have you talk about stability and community and why that's very, very important for kids. Talk about why community is a stabilizing factor for kids and what you mean by community.
Well, I mean, children need families. Their first community is their family. It used to be their nuclear family and their extended family, right? So your mother, your father, your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, your cousins. And before, what I call the family diaspora, we all used to live in the same communities. We lived in the same towns, or at least near one another. We would go far, but not so far. And now families, they leave where they come from and they go far away. And so people don't have extended family around. But they also don't have nuclear families. I mean, so, there's a huge rise, a huge uptick, and we could talk about that. That could be a whole show, why there's a huge uptick in single mothers by choice. What have we done to society that, if you're single and because your spouse dies or there's a terrible divorce, you can't help them. But there are people having children on their own and thinking it's a good thing. And so we have to question, is it a good thing to have children on our own? It's very hard to have a child without having family. If you're a single mother, move in with your own mother, move in with an aunt, move in with your best friend who's raising a child. You have to create community. So that's the first thing. And then the larger community. We've dissolved religious communities. I mean, we don't feel connected to our faith-based communities, which, whether or not you believe in God, they provided people with a source of support, right? So if you go into my temple on any Friday night and you ask the people that are there for a Shabbat service why they're there, half of them will say they're there because they believe in God, and half of them will say that they're there for the community. And so community is very important. We are social creatures. We are not meant to raise children in isolation. We are meant to raise children within a community.
I love it because we go to church regularly as well. I remember once I was going to give a lecture on parenting, and my college-age son said, "What are you going to talk about, Mom?" And I said, "Well, what should I talk about?" I wanted to hear what he thought was important for kids. And he said 2 things. He said, "Tell parents not to act like kids. Don't party with your kids." In other words, and make sure that they have good friends that are like them. I was really taken aback. And he said, "One of the things that really made me feel secure growing up, Mom, is that you and Dad had friends that were very like-minded, and I got to know them. And I never realized the impact that our friends and our involvement with our friends had on him, because he never said, 'Oh, I love it when you have, the man's over for dinner.' And yet they were a critically important part of his life." Why do kids, as they're growing up, need not just peer community? Because I think we're, quote, good at, I don't think it's a good thing, but we're good at, as parents, pushing our kids into a peer culture when they're teenagers. And you hear parents say all the time, oh, he just needs his friends. He just wants his friends. He wants nothing to do with me. But that's not really true. Kids need adults around them who are a community. Why is that important to kids and particularly teenagers?
Well, what you just said is really important, that having friends as parents who share a similar value system. So, the idea is we raise our children, hopefully, with a value system. And in our communities, the communities that we're in share a similar value system. And so when you raise your children amongst your friends and amongst other adults, it gives children an alternative. I mean, sometimes you go to your parents for advice and support, but you also need to have other trusted adults that you go to, grandparents or your father's best friend or your mother's friend, or because sometimes children in the separation process need a little space from their parents. So then they need other trusted adults they can turn to. We really haven't given them that extended family circle of trusted adults to really turn to. So, and what happens if your parents are not that balanced? What happens if they do have emotional issues or alcohol issues? Or, so when you give your children a circle of adults, you give them other people that they can also turn to.
I love it because kids need to belong and need to fit somewhere. And that's a big part of their identity. I have to take a quick break, but before I go, I want to invite you to join me on Instagram and YouTube. You can find the account as Dr. Meg Meeker or simply enter the handle at Dr. Meg Meeker. And while you're there, click on the link in the bio for immediate access to valuable resources for your parenting journey. We'll be right back. Some days, parenting feels like chasing moments that never quite land. You ask a question, they shrug. You try again, they look at their screen. And you wonder, why is this so hard? That's why I love FamGabs. It's a 70-card deck created by a child therapist who spent 16 years working directly with families, helping parents and kids break through the awkward one-word answers and really connect. The questions are open-ended, thoughtfully chosen, and designed to get your child talking and keep the conversation going. There are even bonus cards just for parents to help you build your confidence in your connection toolbox. If you've ever wished for a better way to understand your child or just to have more meaningful conversations as a family, FamGabs is such a gift. Search FamGabs on Amazon and use promo code DrMegPod during checkout to get 10% off your order. That's FamGabs on Amazon. Use promo code DrMegPod and get 10% off your order. You know that moment when your child lights up because something finally clicks? That's what every parent wants, to see their child thrive. But when school just isn't the right fit, that joy can fade. That's why I want to tell you about K-12 powered schools. These are tuition-free, accredited online public schools for kindergarten through 12th grade. They're designed to meet your child where they are so they can learn at their own pace, in their own space, and a curriculum that fits their unique learning style. And here's what sets it apart. This isn't homeschooling. You're not the teacher. K-12's state-certified online educators are trained to make lessons interactive and engaging using innovative technology. And your child still gets social experiences, clubs, extracurriculars, even in-person events. K-12 has helped over 3 million families give their kids the tools to thrive, and they've been doing it for more than 25 years. It could be exactly what your child needs. Visit k12.com/Dr. Meg to find a tuition-free K-12 powered school near you and enroll today. That's k12./DRMEG, all caps. And our culture at large, educational, social, medical, psychology-wise, we're championing autonomy, it seems. And we're teaching parents that your child needs autonomy. They need separation. They need to shape their own identity, to make their own decisions, to think on their own, and to not rely on other people to make those decisions. And the extreme of that, what we're seeing now, of course, is the gender issue, the transgender. Choose your gender because nothing is inherent in you. But identity formation in kids is really dependent on many other factors. And I think community and family in there it's really sort of what a lot of parents would say flies in the face of this idea of teaching autonomy to kids. But can you teach a child to be in a community, a healthy community of adults or extended family, and even some peers, and become independent? Would they become more independent or less independent, do you think, if they had that community?
Well, I mean, it's interesting what you said about gender and sexuality. I just want to put a little something in there for people to think about. Really, we started focusing on gender and sexuality as a major part of our identity when we stopped focusing on ethnocultural identity and religious identity. So we need identity, we need community. And when we left one place, we had to find another place. So everybody used to make fun of Freud. I'm trained as a Freudian analyst. I'm not a strict Freudian analyst at all, but I was trained as one. And people always made fun of Freud because he focused too much on sex. And the point is that we focus too much on sex.
Here we are.
Here we are.
Exactly.
And all the
full circle.
all the years they made fun of Freud and said he, but here we are because we left ethnocultural and religious identity behind us. People had to find another. It's sort of like plowing snow in the winter. It doesn't melt. You just push it from one place to another. We do need identity. It does make us feel secure. It gives us a sense of value. It gives us a sense of belonging. And it actually, interestingly, when we feel secure in where we come from, we can then establish where we're going. It's very hard to know where we're going in life if we don't understand where we come from. And if we don't give our children a very clear sense of who they are and where they come from, then you can't expect them to feel secure in knowing where they're going.
So I just want to reiterate what you're saying, or what I believe you're saying, is that it's good for parents to teach their children early on who they are, who they belong to, parents, God, what their social ecosystem is all about and how they fit into that. And the kids don't need to choose it. And that will make them feel good so that they can end up in a healthy spot later down the road. Is that correct?
Yes, because the more secure we feel in our identity, the more secure we feel, the more truly, organically interdependent we can be. I mean, we don't really want our children to be. I mean, the whole thing about wanting our children to be self-sufficient and independent, in the end, it's a phase. We want them to be able to be independent and self-sufficient, but not that the end goal is independence. Because if the end goal is independence, then you can't form intimate relationships. You can't trust others. You're not really having meaningful relationships. You're not forming families. So we want interdependence. That's the end goal. The end goal is not independence. So does it help to come from a community to become interdependent? Of course it does.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about kids who are finishing high school, going off to college, and what we do as our kids are off into college and sending them to higher education is, figure out what you're really good at, pursue it. And if it takes you to the other ends of the earth and you stay there and you live there and raise my grandkids there, all is good. But maybe it isn't good. So there's got to be that balance there. I grew up on the East Coast and went to an all-women's college and was very driven in my career. And yet I always had the sense that I really belonged with my family. My siblings and I all ended up scattering around the country, which is really hard. So I would just encourage parents, as if they have high school students or college students, to think about this. It isn't, your job isn't necessarily to raise a child who just wants to go off and see you once a year and enjoy making a whole lot of money in China or wherever, where they never get to see you. So that's a critical part of the family connection is a critical part, but it doesn't mean that you can't leave Mayberry.
That ship has sailed. Mayberry is the world. So that ship has sailed. But you know the expression chickens come home to roost? I love that expression because the truth is that chickens only come home to roost if they get nurturance at the roost, at the hen house. And so, if you nurture them when they're young and then you let them go, a lot of them will come back. They might not come back right away. They might spread their wings. They might fly. They might try to be independent instead of interdependent. But when they have children, they're more likely to consider coming home, And so, in the end, of course we want them near us because we want extended family, but we can't hold our children too dearly near us. But, if we give them what they need, a lot of them will return.
Exactly. And now, with FaceTime and everything, there are other ways they can, quote unquote, come back to us. We're kind of running out of time, but your fifth factor is talking about regulating technology. And I love that you say in their lecture, and I tend to do this as well. So you called me out on this, is saying, you know what? The biggest problem with our kids, girls is social media and boys it's video games and pornography or so forth. And that's a huge part of the depression and anxiety and the problems, the mental illness that we're seeing amongst our kids. But it isn't the whole, sum of the game. Talk about why it's important to regulate technology and is it realistic for parents? Because parents feel very overwhelmed. They feel that the battle's lost, that there's no way they can keep from giving their 11, 12-year-old kid a cell phone. So talk about why regulation is important. And then if you could just encourage parents about how they can begin to do that a little.
Well, our children don't know in the end what's best for them. They don't, their prefrontal cortex, that part of their brain that has judgment and perceives of things with nuance, and they don't know what's good for them yet. So we still have to know better. And so the good news is that there's a lot of technology now that allows parents to give their kids a phone without it having social media, without it having all those platforms that are dangerous. But the reason that we have to be so suspect of technology, again, the jack is out of the box. Technology is not going anywhere. But what we need to do is really have boundaries around it, which is the longer you wait to give your children a smartphone that gives them access to all social media platforms, the better. So if you could wait till 14 or 15 to give them an iPhone or a Samsung or one of these phones that has everything. Instead, you give them a flip phone. You give them one of these phones that just, may allow them to play a few games while they're on the bus, but doesn't really allow them to use social media. And so that's much healthier. So the good news is they're starting to invent technologies that give parents options. But parents are afraid to say no to their children today. And I think out of guilt, they give their children technology as a replacement for spending time with them. Meaning, I think when kids ask for things, they say yes, because it's a way to give, and they feel that they're not giving in other ways. And I think there is a sort of deep unconscious guilt in our culture about what we're giving or not giving our children, how much time we're spending with them, how interested we really are in childhood and in children. And so I think the technology, if you will, is just a material thing, right? It's an iPad, it's an iPhone, it's a video game, and they're expensive. And so it's a way to compensate for feeling that we're not giving to them in other ways. So first we have to get a hold of that as parents. We have to, again, that self-awareness of what we really want to give them and not have to walk around feeling conflicted. Give them what they actually need and what you really want to give them. And then you can say no to things like technology without feeling guilty about saying no to technology. The reason that technology is so hard on the adolescent brain is because the threat sensing parts of the brain and the reward centers of the brain are developing at a rate that the prefrontal cortex or the emotional regulation part of the brain can't keep. So, I think Dan Siegel called it all gas and no brakes, right? So we have the reward centers running ahead, and the prefrontal cortex, which manages it emotionally, can't keep up, right? Because it doesn't develop till 25. And then you have the threat sensing brain part of the brain, particularly in girls, which makes girls very self-conscious, very, very sensitive to criticism. Now you put them on social media where it's all about perfectionism and the comparison culture and criticism and self-consciousness, and it makes them break down. So this technology was designed, I hate to sound sort of like, a conspiracy theory. It was designed to take advantage of the adolescent brain in a very destructive way because it's addictive, because they knew it would make these kids addicted. So it's up to us as parents to set the boundaries, to keep the smartphones out of their hands as long as possible, and to regulate their use as long as we can.
I love that. And I agree. I think sometimes my adult kids think I'm a conspiracy theorist. Why are you so afraid? I said, I'm not afraid at all. I try to be wise because I really do believe a lot of the people who invented the iPhone, smartphones, the tech people, I don't believe they set out to say, let's mess up kids as much as we can. They wanted to bring something forward that they believed would increase communication, maybe connection, and make a lot of money at the same time. But what happened is it sort of morphed into this because there really was no factoring in of the adolescent brain. But now we know. And I love that you say there's sort of this subconscious guilt that parents have because they feel they need to compensate for something else. I also think that parents are just afraid of making their child stand out as sort of the geek in the class. I hear this all the time. I rarely find a parent who wants their kid to have a cell phone. They say, I don't want them to have a cell phone, but I don't want them to have a smartphone, but everybody else does. And, to that I say, well, why don't you form a group of parents, 5, in your class and say, we're going to do an experiment here. We're going to take smartphones away from all of our kids for a month and see how they do. They're all in this together. But there's this real fear, I think, of disappointing their kids or saying no to kids because they fear there's going to be backlash on their kid, which is a little odd. Can you just comment on that for a second?
I mean, I think a lot of parents have experiences of going through middle school and high school where they felt rejected or where they felt teased and bullied. So what they're doing is they're projecting onto their children their own experiences, which is not unusual. So meaning if we haven't grappled with our own painful experiences, we project onto our children what we went through, right? So the idea that they're afraid their children will be rejected or left out or listen, if your child is rejected or left out, giving them a cell phone is not going to make them feel more accepted and more included. But giving them a material item that, potentially could do more damage. If a child is teased and bullied and you give them a cell phone, now you've given them a vehicle for those kids to tease and bully them online. And so, so I think parents have to kind of rethink they have to understand their own motivation. So if you're afraid your child is going to be teased and bullied and left out, that's a time to parent. That's a time to sit down with them and explore feelings and listen to your child and ask them good questions and ask them if they have friends, meaningful friendships, and are they in the right environment? Is it the right school environment? And, have they found themselves in the wrong group of kids? Do they need to make other friends? Those are the conversations that are important, not going out and getting them a cell phone. So I think it's sort of trivializing or superficializing what may be happening. But I do think a lot of parents project onto their children their own kind of challenging social experiences in middle school and high school.
Again, we go back to that focus of you're not a bad parent. We're not bad parents. We want to be parents. Many of us are doing the best we can, but we just need to stop and try to understand our kids more. The best way to get them to talk is to start by listening and not talking so much. My amazing guest has been Komisar. Thanks so much for taking time out of your incredibly busy day and talking to me today. My featured guest today was Erica Komisar, author of Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters, and Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. Learn more about her impactful projects on ericakomisar.com, linked in our show notes. I really enjoyed my insightful discussion with Erica, and I trust that you found it valuable too. And before I wrap up, here are my key takeaways. 1, invest in early attachment. The first 3 years play a pivotal role in shaping your baby's emotional well-being. We strongly advocate for active engagement with your child, both physically and emotionally. This fosters a secure attachment, laying the groundwork for essential feelings of safety and trust that are crucial for their mental health. 2, prioritize parental well-being. That means you, mom, and you, dad. Children's mental health directly correlates with parental emotional well-being. So now is the time to proactively address unresolved conflicts you may have or past traumas in order to prevent passing on emotional baggage to your kids. A mentally healthy parent greatly influences a child's emotional development. 3, it really does take a village. Recognize the vital role of a stable community of friends you develop in your child's well-being. It's not just about their friends, it's about your friends as well. When you build a supportive community, this aids your child in navigating challenges and offers alternatives to relying solely on parental support. And as we consistently stress, be kind to yourself, moms and dads. I wish you a fantastic start to the new year. Remember, you're not alone. We are here for you. And until we meet again, I encourage you to explore my website, drmegmeeker.com, where I've gathered a wealth of resources to support you on your parenting journey. And until next time, Happy New Year, friends. And always remember, great kids are raised, not born.